So good morning, everyone, on this second day of our blended workshop. On behalf of SciDev and CCIS, partners in Albania and co-organizers of this workshop, we would like to welcome all you, our partners, and young people participating in the second day, especially with a focus on youth perspectives at the end of today's sessions. As you are aware, all our meetings are being recorded for dissemination purposes, and you can find them published in our social media pages, but also that of other partners. And UWB project is supported by Europe for Citizens, and we are very happy to bring this youth perspectives and working with young people to make them understand more about dealing with the past, remembrance, and the way communist and former regimes in Western Balkans, but also in Europe, have been operating, and what are their impacts in the current societies in current Europe. Without further ado, as you already know from the agenda, we have today four main guests that will discuss their research papers and research focuses with us. And then at the end, we will also have a dedicated space for young people and their perspectives on the topic, and also why not their understanding and how they perceive this period of the past, especially in the region of Western Balkans, but also Albania, that, as you are aware, had a specific kind of former communist regime. So I'd like to welcome Mr. Altin Gjeta. He's a researcher and also lecturer at University Alexander Moisiu Durrës. And today he will be with us talking about collective memory rebuilding and political discourse in post-totalitarian Albania. And of course, I know Altin personally, so his views are always using critical approaches. Altin, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Luciana. I'm delighted to be part of this event. Dear colleagues, dear youngsters, dear professors, it's a pleasure for me to be today with you and discuss a very important topic, I think, regarding the communist past of Albania and how we have dealt with it during these transition years. I'll try to keep it very brief. I'll talk about collective, as Luciana said, I'll talk about collective memory building and political discourse in post-totalitarian Albania. My research aim was, in fact, to kind of explore a possible correlation between collective memory building on the communist past of Albania and political discourse of political parties during the transition years. As you already know, Albania experienced one of the most harshest communist regimes during after the World War II up to 1990, and wide range of crimes were committed by a security mechanism, a violence apparatus, which was built by the regime to fear and obedience among the population. But with the fall of the regime in the 1990s, there are hopes among the Albanian population that Albania will deal with these crimes, will punish the perpetrators of human rights, and will start a new area and will democratize and open up to the Western world. However, as I have argued in another paper, fortunately, Albania is the only country in the Central Eastern Europe that failed to implement transitional justice measures altogether, though it undertook some stringent and ambitious transitional justice measures. In the beginning, it failed to implement them due to a combination of factors such as a lack of political consensus between all political parties to deal seriously with this issue, due to communist legacy in politics, public administration, judicial system, and also due to the inability of society as well to pressure on stakeholders and institutions. However, failing to deal with the past, failing to punish the perpetrators, had a severe effect on collective memory building in the communist past communist regime's crimes. And it is interesting to note that grave human rights abuses of the communist regime are totally absent in school textbooks, for example. According to a recent survey, more than 60% of teachers, of social science teachers in elementary and secondary education are not aware of the communist regime's crimes, which is really alarming with regard to our ability as a society to uncover the crimes and abuses that communist regime committed for half of a century. And this has brought about grave consequences, especially on the youth, which has been unable to get a glimpse what the communist regime was and what kind of crimes committed. This has created conflicting perceptions among the youth about the past, because their only source of information have been their families and media and unfortunately kino studio films, which is a part and parcel of the regime's propaganda. So they have lost the they have been left without clear references to the past, and they don't really reflect this even when we discuss with them in the auditors. The alliance of the post-communist Albania to deal with the communist state's human rights abuses, as I said, has brought about grave consequences on uncovering the truth and building a shared understanding on the communist past. Unfortunately, in the public sphere, communist regimes have started to be denied, to be disputed, and recently there have been a tendency by the state authorities to lavish the violence symbols of the communist regime, like, for example, the project to rebuild the pyramid, which was built after the death of dictator Enver Hoxha, to incarnate his personal cult in the center of Tirana. While on the other hand, victims' sufferings are abandoned, are downplayed, and for example, all governments across the board have done nothing, for example, to rebuild the prison of Spac, of Chavbari or Burel, where thousands of people suffered during the communist regime, were imprisoned, were maltreated, and some of them were even killed. So the government has totally downplayed their sufferings and has tried to honor the perpetrators, which is paradoxically and ironically, I would say, unacceptable. Because, for example, the government has built the House of Leaves as a museum. The House of Leaves, for you that don't really know what it is, and I think, as far as I know, we will have the chance to go and visit tomorrow. The House of Leaves was one of the, it was the center of the premises of the Sigurimi, the state apparatus the state surveillance apparatus of the communist regime, which perpetrated, surveyed, espionaged people and punished people during the communist regime. Also, the government and society has supported the building of bunkar in the center of Tirana, which displays communist regime area violence mechanisms. And on the other hand, as I said, it has totally abandoned victims' sufferings during the communist regime. So there has been a tendency to rehabilitate the past in light of the present. Therefore, I don't think that we can talk about a shared understanding, truth uncovering about communist regimes' crimes, which has really affected the way of doing politics during the transition. And I think that this has gave rise to the emergence of the politics of anti-politics. What is anti-politics? Just to explain it very simply for you, is the usage of the past, of the uncovered past, to build a kind of unpolitical discourse which does not address people's and social groups' real needs and concerns, but focuses in throwing accusations against our other political opponents as a propaganda to deflect people's attentions from real problems of the country. And this has happened during the democratic transitions of Albania after the 90s till today. The political discourse, unfortunately, has fell into a dichotomy between communists and anti-communists, which has been, I think, an empty narrative to benefit electorally and politically the old political elite, which somehow is a continuation of the communist political elite. And this dichotomy is used to deflect people's attentions and benefit electorally. So as we are about to hold our 10th general election since the fall of the communist regime, and I have tried to study carefully the electoral campaigns, and political parties have not yet addressed people's needs. They do not deliver what they want to do. They do not talk on political manifestos, but they keep throwing accusations to their political opponents with reference to the past, accusing them of being part of security service during the communist regime, or being part of the Labour Party, the Communist Party. And they have tried so to build a kind of a legitimacy by degrading their opponents and not addressing social groups' needs. This has brought a kind of a crisis of representation in Albania. Most of the people don't feel represented by the political elite. They feel disenfranchised, and this has also brought about consequences on direction of democratization of Albania after the 90s. And just to conclude, I would like to say that the inability of Albania to address the past, to make a bold clear with the communist past, and to build a shared understanding and collective memory of the past has produced severe consequences on the democratization process. As I said, it has gave birth an unpolitical discourse which does not address people's needs and tend just to deflect their attention and manipulate their minds with the sole aim of the current political elite, which is somehow a continuation of the old political elite, to cling to power. And I think that unfortunately, though it's been 3 decades that Albania has started its long-lasting, unfortunately, democratic transitions, I think that it still keeps being hostage of its past, which is hunting the present and the future of Albania. That's it. I think. Thank you for listening to me, and I'm open to any questions afterwards. I think, Luciana.
Thank you, Altin, and thank you for pointing out this important aspect of rebuilding political discourse in this long-lasting, as you pointed out, democratic transition of Albania, almost 30 years now. As you are aware, totalitarian regimes involve all facets of the society, and personal life and public life were, at least in Albania, somehow merged, and all freedoms were abolished. This could be observed on an architectural and interior designer point of view, also in the lifestyles inside our homes and houses during the time. And for this, I would like to give the floor to Dr. Erida Zurai, and she will show us how actually design furniture was during communism in Albania. Thank you, Erida.
Thank you, Luciana. I would really like firstly to join my screen. Okay. Is it okay now? Can you see it?
Yes, yes.
Okay. So better that I can make it the full screen. Okay, so I think now it's okay, huh?
Yes, perfect.
Okay. Dear participants, dear speakers, and dear partners of this project, the UW project, I'm very happy to be part of this workshop, and thanks to CCIS for inviting me to have this opportunity to discuss about my results or about my research and about my findings of doctoral dissertation. Indeed, in terms of my professional background, I am an architect and I have 15 years experience showing and purchasing furniture in different countries, Europe to Asia, visiting exhibition and as well meeting, discussing with engineers, with architects of the manufacturing with the same aim to develop the successful design for Albanian market. During my experience, I gathered many data that lead me to the main conclusion that design principles, the rules that the design must follow, are very much correlated with the political and social economy context. For instance, I take these examples to make it more simple for everybody. The design of Polvara, it is indeed a stackable bookcase. It dates from 1975. It is the first example of the modular bookcase, totally in plastic, stacked through grooves and joints. Many novelties that I labeled before studying the history, I thought and I labeled it as IKEA design. Polvara concepts were widely expanded by IKEA, but when? On 2000, it is on IKEA design. It is very wide expanded by IKEA, but in different kind of design, different kind of colors, different kind of modular shapes or modular sizes, and different kind of material, like it was in that time, like in rattan, in fabric, etc. A very good example that I wanted to share with you is as well the Cartel master chair. It is one of the most favorable or most successful design during 2000 years. But what it is about, how this design come on 2000? Indeed, it is this design is very this design is a combination of three designs of the years 50. It is the Arnold Jacob design, is the Igor Sarnes tulip armchair design, and this is as well a Charles M. Eiffel design. So the combination of these 15 years designs came together to make the Cartel design. Today, you can see that the Amos Eiffel design is in different kind of material, different kind of design of colors, and as well what is the specific that they have been changed is the legs, because the legs are the novelties that indeed the ice brings in 50s. I would like Dorina to help me with a poll here, because I really wondering to have some comments from the audience, from the participants.
Yes, Rita. So I guess everyone now can see the dialog box with polls. It is popping up on your screen. You can just scroll it a little bit on your right, so you can still look at the pictures Rita is sharing. Thank you.
Sorry to interrupt, but in the second question, we cannot choose only one alternative because they are all true.
You can choose where you found for the first time.
Okay.
It's okay, Luciana? Everybody has voted?
We wait for 2 or 3 more votes.
Okay.
All right, so now I'm sharing the results.
Thank you. So 70% of us here in this audience knows about these chairs. Most of them had home, at friends' house, at bars, okay. And according to them, it is associated with the communism style. 53% of us thought that this is associated with the communism style. Okay, thank you very much. I really appreciate your being part of this poll, because really I would like to come up with the news that it was still, even for me, a news. Okay, so this design indeed is from 1890. So this is a toned chair. And yes, for your wonder, the design is really associated in nowadays like a communism design, but it is more than 1,000 years, let's say. Oh, sorry, 150 years. So this is a really an humble design. It is made by 4 simple legs in the 5 slats on the back. And indeed, this design is, the material of this design is a beech frame. And what is really wonderful is that everything is handmade. Why? Because this design is a bended wood design. So each of these details is element is bended. So in this regard, in this light, after 8 years working on the product development process, on 2014, I decided to enroll on the PhD degree. Indeed, it was an international program between Ferrara University and Polish University, but my interest was to combine my professional background and with systematic academic research to understand why some global design in home furniture are not very successful as some others in Albania market. So in this light, I started to explore and better understand 3 main elements: to understand history from 50 to 90, understand the production from 50 to 90, understand the innovation system from this period. Indeed, what I found during my study, during my research, it was really not easy way, let's say. I found that this road wouldn't be so easy that what I was thinking in the beginning. So the main limits that I found were that furniture design process and development in communism has not been conducted earlier in Albania focus. As well, there has been missing in Albania a comparative framework of furniture design between 2 different main times, like in communism and free market. And as well, there have been so scarce information about how this design was followed up. So that's why I have to run in different kind of sources as well. Important word that, let's say, everybody that I met, everywhere that I went, everybody was so friendly and so open to help me with this. So I really appreciate, and I can still even say every time that is the opportunity to say that everybody that has been part of this research were very friendly and welcome, and they give all their knowledge. So on my archival methodology, I used many different sources as well from all archives documents. For instance, from Albania State Archive, I studied 34 films, or from the Central State Archive, I studied 124 films. And as well, I used the observation and field research, meeting people, and as well museum visiting. And for instance, I visited 30 houses, apartments of random people that everybody opened their house in this case. And I really, again, appreciate their warmness. And as well, I used the interviews. There have been indirect interviews, there were in-depth interviews, face-to-face, online, and as well interviews of a group of people, of the work group people. So in the end, what I understand that the achieved results, one of the achieved results were building the database of the furniture design during that period. And as well, what is more important is to prioritize the indicators of the design principles, and as well to understand the contextualizing of the prices and of why the design was in that time like this. For instance, in this table, one of the comparison has been that how many pieces you can buy with one salary in that time. So it is very important to understand the contextualize of the why this process was in that time. So that's why I used salary. It was the first idea that came to my mind, how to compare between two different timings, that time, that period, 50 to 90, and today. So that's why salary was not so very convenient for me to understand really the price and the contextualize why the design was that time. So that's why I started to make more deeper, to go to the prices of the bread. So that's why I can make the comparison from 60 to 2000, how many breads it is needed to buy a chair or furniture, like a bedroom, like a table, etc. But this was one way. Another way, I really have to be more in detail on the architectural point of view. So that's why the product that was that were in my focus, I redesigned them in technical point of view. So I understand now this database built is very easy to send to the business, and why not to reproduce them from the beginning. And the third main point was to understand how this design was in the other centralized economy, not only in Albania, but in the same timing in the other centralized economy countries. So what I suggest to all the new researchers is that, first of all, you have to be as much detailed. So you don't have to go, you don't have to let yourself just to understand, let's say, how much important was in economical point of view this let's say, wood production during, let's say, in this year, so wood industry capacity. But you have to go more in which cities, or how many designs, and for instance, how many kind of wood has been used, or what kind of production value, or let's say mapping, or what kind of integrity it was in that time about the production. Let's say I took one example here, which is the wood industry, but you can go in every kind of topic in this detailing. The second suggestion I'm giving to the participant, the young researchers, is to don't hesitate to meet your target. You don't know how much they help you, not only on the let's say personal point of view, but as well in the research point of view. And what is very, very important is that really you are not alone. So which means that your history, your economic point of view, it's never like an island in everywhere where are you living. So that's why you have to go deep to understand the interrelation and relation, economically, social, and for sure the historical point of view, in globally, and as well in chronologically point of view. So my conclusion to this topic is that the study highlights that furniture design during communism can be characterized as mass production, but strongly impacted by the political dogma. The two main features of this mass production are standardization, which totally impact the quality of the product in itself, and the political dogma limited the mass consumption of the product regulated by supply-demand balances, which it's not used in or it's not happening in the market economy. What I would like to recommend is that based on the findings of this doctoral research project, three main project ideas are suggested for the future development. First is the industrial heritage in Albania. So this is, let's say, the emerged topic that I really want to push everybody that could be here, and moreover, development of communism heritage tourism and moving forward comeback project. These are my main project ideas that I want to follow up, and I'm following up since I graduated, since I finished my dissertation. To achieve them, first steps suggested are to increase the awareness of the importance of industrial history in understanding heritage, and second, to grow tendency to use industrial heritage. Indeed, even after following up some articles, I still understand that in Albania, there is a misunderstanding of the value of the industrial heritage, is the lack of a community consensus and political responsibleness. So I'm very happy, and thank you for your time, and please feel free to send me any question.
Thank you, Rida, for a very interesting presentation and very interesting topic and observation. Also taking up on your last remark of the lack of political consciousness and political cultures, I would use this opportunity to give the floor to Professor Ilir Kalemaj from New York University of Tirana, who will precisely focus on this lack of political culture and its impacts on democratic consolidation of current Albania during democratic transition.
Luciana, before giving my floor, thank you very much, and sorry to take the other time. I really want to give this announce to the young for tomorrow, that we are going to meet at that time and this meeting point. But I will remind it again later. So thank you very much.
Yes, thank you. So tomorrow is the on-site visit. So please, all young people and other participants, get in touch with Rida for time and date. We will notify it again at the end of the workshop. Professor Ilir, the floor is yours to guide us through lack or a little bit of political culture existing in Albania. Sorry, you are muted.
So sorry. Thank you very much, Luciana. My presentation, as you correctly pointed out, focuses on political culture, which in a way explains Albanian lacks of democratic consolidation. So in a way picks up where Altin left off when talking about totalitarian communist regime that Albania had. And actually, that's very important to stress out, because all former Eastern Europe had the form of communism, but the differences were huge. So on one hand, we have authoritarian regimes like in Poland. On the other hand, we had post-totalitarian regimes like in Hungary or Czechoslovakia, or East Germany. On the other hand, we had regimes that were allowed a lot of flexibility, like Yugoslavia, or forms of totalitarian/sultanistic regimes like Romania during Ceausescu. But the only pure totalitarian regimes, at least according to the framework by Stefan Lins, were that of totalitarian Albania for 50 years actually, and Stalin's Russia, Stalin's Soviet Union, I'm sorry. During Khrushchev or Brezhnev era, that was more relaxed rules when it comes to that particular form of communism. So Albania having the harshest totalitarian communist system, of course, it transferred that legacy toward the post-communist period, and that's why it has had one of the most difficult transitions in the last 3 decades. So it started actually with Albania being the last country to finally overthrow the communist regime. And it happened after the communist nomenclatura in Albania saw the killing basically of Ceausescu and his wife Elena in Bucharest. And basically they were afraid, scared that something like that would happen to them as well. And they finally allowed the first elections where the communists won, but very soon where the other elections and the opposition finally won. So Albanian transition toward democracy started much later than their counterpart in the Eastern Europe. Not to forget that Solidarność in Poland started as early as 1981. It's a road toward transition. And of course, it was by 1989 that most of the transition in Eastern Europe were already starting to roll, while Albania had to wait until 1992 for the first transition to actually take place. That also reflected the rocky road toward transition that Albania had during this, as I mentioned, the last 30 years. I believe that a big role to these dysfunctionalities of Albanian transitions has been political antagonism, increasing authoritarian tendencies, and the lack of institutional bedrock, as I've argued somewhere else, or as some authors have pointed out, the divisive and leader-dominated political party system in Albania, which in themselves reflects the lack of political culture. And when we talk of political culture, what we have in mind is definition by Almond and Verba, which is the most widely spread definition in the field, that defines political culture as a set of values, norms, knowledge, attitudes, and feelings that determine political behavior towards the political system. So in other words, they consider political culture as an element that connects individual behavior with the political system as a whole. Culture and politics are the two basic areas of the state. With the exclusion of culture from politics and vice versa, it's very dangerous for the health of a nation. So when we refer to political culture, it's very important to keep in mind the previous regimes or systems and how they affect the current democratic system. But even before communist period, Albania didn't have a consolidated institutional or consolidated democratic culture. So of course that also reflected in the post-communist trajectory. There are some scholars who point out, for example, in relation to Russia, that a country has to be under democratic transition for as long as it used to be under authoritarian rule. So let's say in the case of Russia, since the last 600 years has been more or less authoritarian rule, one replacing the other. Of course, the bad news in this particular case would be that it would take a very long time and not just a decade or two to fully consolidate its democratic premises. And the same can apply to Albania, actually, because of a very short period of time in the interwar period that Albania tried to consolidate some of its institutions, but of course that was a very little time. Then there was the Nazi-fascist occupation, of course, like it happened in all the other countries, surrounding countries, and then the communist rule, which of course, as I mentioned, it was the most totalitarian of the Eastern Front. So coming back to the classification, but without taking much time, of former communist countries, we see that there are different scholars who have pointed out that there are differences, some of them based on geographical aspects, some of them based on the leadership aspect, some of them based on the traditions that these different countries have. So all of them are important in a way or another. I took particular note of a distinction made by Wolfgang Merkel, who is a big name in democratization studies and has developed a classification of the level of political culture in the former communist countries. For example, he divides them into three different groups. The first group is the group of former Eastern European countries with a high level of political culture, such as Slovenia, Estonia, Czech Republic, Hungary, Croatia, Slovakia, Poland, and Lithuania. So Visegrad countries and Baltic countries plus Slovenia. Then we had, on the other hand, countries that are in the process of consolidation, but that was written some time ago, so probably things have changed for the best. For example, Bulgaria and Romania, which were two countries that didn't join European Union in 2004, like the other 10 Baltic countries, Slovenia, Malta, Cyprus, but they joined in 2007. So they are now in a much better process in consolidating their democracies as well. And the countries with low standards of democracy and political elites, and these countries include, in addition to Russia, Moldova, or other former Soviet republics, also Bosnia and Herzegovina, Serbia, Albania, and North Macedonia, which also fit into this group where they have a low developed political culture as a result of that, a problematic democracy as well, partial democracy in the best scenario, as Freedom House or other democratic indexes tell us. Some of them even can classify as hybrid democracies, or at least unconsolidated democracies. So out of the bunch that I mentioned in the first case, we had some very successful cases. Slovenia, for example, being part of former Yugoslavia, was one of the successful cases early on, and of course developed standards in the same way as Estonia, let's say, or among the Baltic countries, or Czech Republic among the Visegrad countries. On the other hand, there are other authors who divide them based on religion of majority. For example, they made a distinction between the Catholic countries, where, of course, out of the Eastern Europe, for example, we can point out that Poland, that has the large Catholic majority, or Orthodox countries, mostly Slavic countries, and the countries with the majority of Muslim population, for example, in the case of Bosnia and Herzegovina or Albania or Kosovo, in this particular case. This is especially emphasized when political culture, as a culture and political phenomenon in Southeastern Europe, is accompanied by study comparisons with Western standards. For example, in the Western standards, there is this distinction between the Catholic and Protestant countries, where the Protestant countries having a faster democratic consolidation, so to speak, or they represent some of the older consolidated democracies. So the new political culture of post-communist societies is a product of processes which are developing in at least 3 dimensions. So the first dimension is the universal dimension, where political culture is associated with typical symptoms and phenomena, where every turn associated with changed political systems or regimes, and not simply political rotations. The second is the regional dimension, where its integral element are the structural changes characteristic of those countries which are on the path from communism toward democratic order market economy, which is more or less the countries that we're talking about. And in the dimension of the special path, where the history, geopolitical conditions, and national structure of post-totalitarian states influence the challenges that these states have to face, a differentiated character and a different scope of action. And here, for example, Albania can fit, having this post-totalitarian trajectory. In this paper, I argue that democracy cannot develop independently of political culture. Sound democracy in Albania depends very much on the degree of development of the Albanian political culture, which means that every citizen with his own behavior, attitudes, practice, and moral norms determines the ability as an individual, as a society, and people to self-govern. So citizens of a free society in a democracy, we should keep in mind that they pursue their own interests, exercise their rights, and are accountable for their private lives. They decide. They should be the only one to decide about their daily lives, about their present and their future, about their family and their children. If they want to live in Albania, in Europe, in the world, according to their skills and beliefs, and the way that they deal with multiple aspects, not just politics, but also art, philosophy, science, arts, and so on. So in a way, their own self-determination. Political culture in the broadest sense of the word is not about the concept, be that idea, artistic, literary, or musical vision, but it is about the behaviors and abilities of a people in a democracy with their responsibilities to govern or self-govern. Seen from this perspective, I might conclude that Albania is still in its way to consolidate its political culture, which in a way is a conditio sine qua non, which means a negotiable condition for the consolidation of both the rule of law and, as a result of that, also consolidated democracy. Thank you very much for your
attention. Thank you, Ilir, and thank you to all participants who are asking their questions in the chat. There will be a session afterwards, but just in case, since we are going one by one with the speakers, you can use this opportunity. And the next speaker on the list is Professor Dorina Japane, a lecturer and researcher at Waras University, and she will guide us through different constitutional systems in Albania statehood and how unity and separation of powers was in light of these constitutional systems. Dorina, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Luciana. Hello, everybody. I'm Dorina Japane. I'm a professor, lecturer of public law, and it's my great pleasure to be today with you in this workshop. So every year I discuss with my students about the political regimes and forms of government. And yet, while writing this paper, I had a very bring back experience. My article is on the principles of the unity and separation of powers in the different constitutional systems that Albania had. But the communist experience raises important jurisprudential questions for our contemporary understanding of law, for the limits of the sovereignty, the law's relationship with the historical violence, and so on. While doing my research and reading again and again about the communist regime, made me reflect on how limited studies, as my colleague said, we have dedicated to our recent past. So a very few of it is reflected in our school and university curricula. Ignoring the important fact, I think, that without studying the bigger communist past of our country, we cannot understand, appreciate, and enjoy our today's democracy, no matter how problematic it may be. So I want to thank this project, this workshop with great and scientific values for me. I want to thank you, all the young people who have joined this workshop. And let us together reflect and discuss about all these past regimes. Above all, we have not to forget that we have an obligation to pass this information to the generations to come. The message about the regime, about the atrocity of the communist regime in Albania, how the regime destroyed thousands of lives. We can never adequately retell the reality of the communist regime, but any research, publication, or discussion that describes life under the communist regime, that shows the total control we had, the censorship, the paranoia, the secret police, the torture camp, the labor camps, the relocation and executions, exposes the cults of personality that empower these regimes are real treasures for us. So, on the other hand, I want to mention that the hiding of these facts behind some positive policies on memory of that regime, monopolizing them, neglects the shedding of light on what happened really in Albania until 1919. This was important for me to mention for the all understanding of the paper that I'm going to share with you now. So, as I mentioned, I want to talk today about the unity and the separation of power in Albania. Just to do a short introduction about what are these two principles. When we talk about constitutional systems, the constitutional system have developed during history to the content and purposes of the constitutions, but also in relation to this important principle, the separation of powers. So perhaps there is no political principle that has been more central and more discussed in the constitutional governance of Western democracy. As we use the terms unity and powers, these terms indicate the principle of the organization and mechanism for the exercise of the state power regarding essentially the communist and the post-communist systems in Albania. Communism constitutes a very important force that has influenced, and I think still does, and has shaped the evolution of the democratic constitutional state. So I started my paper with a quote of a very famous influencer of the modern principle of the separation of power, that is Baron Montesquieu, who in the Spirit of Laws in 1748 mentioned that anyone in power can abuse it. He can get there if he finds no restrictions. In order not to be able to abuse power, you need to stop powers. So the principle of the separation of power is not only of a legal nature, it's also a political issue par excellence. And socialism, not only for this, opposed strongly this principle. Opposed it because socialism considered the separation of power a fabrication of the reality. Full supporting the power of the assemblies as direct representatives of the sovereignty of the people. The first attempt in Albania to realize the separation of power was with the Canon of Civil Administration in Albania in 1913, which can be considered for us as an act of constitutional importance. But it was not a real constitution because in it there was a lot of absences, like, for example, the rights and the freedoms of the individuals. So in Albania, the establishment of the conventional system, as it's called, the principle of the unity of power, is established in May 1945 as a decision of the Congress of Permanent. The Anti-Fascist National Liberation Council was formed as the legislative and executive body, and the Anti-Fascist National Liberation Committee was considered the executive commanding body. This principle was applied then in the two communist constitutions of Albania. Constitution in Albania is a recent terminology because after the Declaration of Independence in 1912, the constitutional discipline was indicated not with the term of constitution, but with the term of the fundamental law in 1914, and then fundamental statutes. Only in 1946, the term will be substituted, these terms will be substituted with the term constitution. As I said, the first constitution of 1946 was approved by the Constituent Assembly, resulting from the elections of 1945, which were the first parliamentary democratic election in Albania, but also the last until 1919. With the adoption of this constitution in Albania, the state organization was sanctioned and was sanctioned as a monistic social state organization. And this lasted for 45 years until the pluralistic system of 1991. In the academic lecture, we always see that the constitution of the 1946 is mentioned as a copy, as a formal copy of the Yugoslav constitution, which was adopted only a few months ago. The new constitution of 1946 defined the form of the government in Albania as the People's Republic of Albania. The Constitution Assembly was the highest body. It was later became the People's Assembly, was called the People's Assembly, and Albania became an isolated national communist state with a Stalinist, anti-revisionist imprint that was a result of the Warsaw Pact states also. The principle of the unity of power was sanctioned and was concentrated in the represented bodies of Albania, such as the People's Assembly, as I mentioned, and the People's Councils, which exercised even the legislative and executive powers. Was a facade. This principle was a facade because under and behind the People's Assembly mechanism was the party bodies, which decided. Authoritarian political regimes, especially totalitarian ones, deny the separation of powers. Deny because the communist ideology in reality rejects it. Rejects it even as a theory, because for this regime, the principle of the unity of power was a facade, because according to them, the mandate to perform any state function is a derivative of the representative power. So the practical application in the social countries, in the socialist countries, of the principle of the unity of power led all these countries to the concentration and the fullness of state power. Not even for the official representative body, but even for the state apparatus and the abuse of power. With regard to the judiciary, to the judicial system, it was determined that the justice in the People's Republic of Socialist Albania was administered by the Supreme Court. The People's Court and the military courts that were independent was said in the Constitution in the exercise of their function, but this wasn't true. The advancement of the communist ideology in accordance with the general doctrine of the party leads to the need to a new constitution for Albania, to draft a new constitution. This constitution in 1976 was constructed on the basis of the first constitution of 46, but the basis of that was then on the basis of the post-Nazist occupation constitution, as I said, but in this constitution, we see the rule of the Party of Labor as the leading force mentioned in the constitution and the vanguard of the working class. So this terminology is used. As in the first constitution was acclaimed the progress along the Marxist materialist dialectic continuum and was marked as her entrance, the Marxist dialectic, into a new phase of socialist development. Albania continues to operate under the principle of the unity of power, and the constitutional system of the socialist state was based on the uniformity of the state authority. We can mention the key role that was entrusted to the parliament as the supreme organ through which the working people exercised authority, yet to the real power was concentrated, as we say, to the Communist Party. In these constitutions, also the people's courts were created, were headed by the Supreme Court, of course. The power was centralized to the extreme, and there was no question of a constitutional justice during this period based on the separation of power and the fundamental rights and freedoms of the individuals. Under the Albanian Constitution of 1976, the People's Assembly continued to be the highest representative body, the supreme organ of the state power, the bearer of the sovereignty, and the sole agency, constitutional and legislative power therein. So, as we see in both Albanian social constitution, no external control was emphasized for the verifying and the compliance of the laws adopted by the People's Assembly. Assembly exercised this competence, so that the verifying of the compliance of the law, exercised this competence and made that we call authentic interpretation of the law. Such principle was applied even in the other socialist countries as well, because this was in line with the principle of the unity of power. Regarding the organization of the state, we can say that there is nothing new in the 1976 constitution, but the dictatorship and the control of the Communist Party is strengthened even more. The fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989 marked the end of the Cold War, as we know, and changed the ideology of the communist countries, changed these countries. And as a result of this, even in Albania, we have the collapse of the state socialism. So on 11th of December of 1919, the political pluralism was introduced in Albania. And as a result, this came as a result of the students' protests in Tirana. As we see the picture here, Never More Communism was one of the parallels used. The democratic pluralism and the pluralist parliament came into force after 67 years in Albania and marked the end of the painful period that we are talking about, and the adoption of a liberal, or began the road of a liberal democracy. So this the 1976 constitution was unable to ensure the new democratic pluralistic system, and in 1991 was approved were approved the main constitutional provisions which introduced the principle of the separation of powers again in Albania as a fundamental principle for the democracy, and one of the top principles of the new constitutional structure in Albania. Article 3 was the article that mentioned this principle in the main disposal provisions. The basic principle of state organization is the separation of legislative, executive, and judicial powers. But this was not functioning very well, because in this period, too broad and extended beyond the executive intervening in the legislative and judicial. So even it was sanctioned, it was not functioning very well. This brought, in 1998, the new constitution, the new democratic constitution of the Republic of Albania. Was not easy. From 1991 to 1990, had to have a constitution for Albania, and this was the fault of the political parties more than the others. The society was ready to have a new constitution, but this came for me a bit late. After the approval of the parliament and the popular referendum, 1998 constitution, as we see at the photo on the constitution was written, here began the future. Here began the future. So it was very important, the new constitution, because not only the separation of state power was set as a precondition for a democratic political regime, but was the institution of the president of the republic was a guarantee almost for this function, the function of these principles guaranteed from the new constitution. The principle was guaranteed from the executive, was guaranteed for the control of the executive power by the legislative power, but not only for the political control from the parliament to the executive power, but also were mentioned the constitutional mechanism through which what should be guaranteed this separation of powers. The constitution, as we mentioned when we talk in our lessons in our universities, is legal, but also a political act. So in this context, I want to say that the constitutional provisions that de jure, as we said, guarantee the principle of the separation of powers, de facto face with the political reality in Albania. So after 23 years of the 1998 democratic constitution, it's important to understand for us that constitutional democracy progresses only when the citizens are willing to sacrifice and their immediate self-interest for a system that will guarantee them long-term rights and freedoms. So history has taught us, has time and again showed us that unlimited power in the hands of one person or a group of persons are suppressed on their powers curtailed. So the separation of power in a functional democracy is to prevent especially the abuse of power and the safeguard of freedom for all. If the separation of power is compromised, is discarded, the citizen stands to rely to personal relationship, nepotism, to corruption, to secure their place in the society. In this environment, the centralized system of communism and fascism in these conditions began to flourish. So this system takes roots in society, precluding the separation of powers that can bring individual rights and merits against the rights of the people and the state. So today, while in Albania the separation of powers is weakened and seriously threatened from a super powerful executive, ensuring and protecting the constitutional democracy and the social contract requires active citizenship. Albanian governance throughout its constitutional system lacked having both political and legal safeguards. Political safeguards include periodical democratic elections, a uniformly political approach that is not enough to prevent the powerful interests existing an executive excessive influence without legal standards for guaranteeing the rights as well and designating and limiting the governmental power. I want to end, sorry I got long, with another quote of James Madison, a founding father and president of the United States, that said that the accumulation of powers, legislative, executive, and judiciary in the same hands, whether one or four or many, or whether hereditary, self-appointed or elective, may justify to promote it the very definition of tyranny. So I want to thank you very much for your attention, and I'm here for any question that you may have. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dorina, and I see that we do have many questions for all of the speakers so far in the chat box. In this slide, I will keep my presentation shortly so we can gain time more for your questions and have an interactive session afterwards. I guess CCSI and SciDev can send also links or of already published materials from our guest speakers in this second workshop. My research focus with regard to the topic is focused on the power to political parties and transitional justice, and main aim and my hypothesis in the research has been that actually transitional justice tools in Albania have been, and transitional justice process itself has been instrumentalized in the hands of political powers. To illustrate this, I have taken into consideration a victim-centered approach of element of transitional justice, which is the case of reparations and financial compensations of former politically persecuted and victims of the former regime. Of course, transitional justice is a very complex process, and it includes, in order to be successful, it must include both victim-centered initiatives, which financial compensations form only part of those, but also perpetrators-centered initiatives, such for the Albanian context could be the so long missing process of lustration in the Albanian society, and for an organic society to move forward and to finally have a successful societal reconciliation. It's very necessary that both approaches are used. Now, just for a very short historical introduction, until early 90s, so the first political parties of Albania were built within the parliament of early 20s, and then we went through world wars, First and Second World War, and then after the establishment of the communism from 45 to 90s, we didn't have a second party to oppose the regime. And why is this relevant for young people to know, and especially for friends, especially from Yugoslavia or Europe? Because otherwise, in contrary to countries who went through the same pattern, but for example, Central Europe, like Poland or Czech Republic, despite not having a formalized political opposition, they did had actually these underground political elites movements that that was going within the society. Meanwhile, in Albania, the system was very totalitarian, and the terror of the system was very high compared to, and it was actually a Stalinist regime, that any kind of opposition, formal or informal, was persecuted. One of the main problems that Albania currently has is that it lacks a clear database, and there are many disputes from different political parties on the discourses of what are the concrete numbers of Albanian victims. This is also for the fact that archives have never been totally opened for the public. There have been several institutions established to somehow promote a certain level of transparency to the crimes of the past, but not completely. Based on the Institute of the Study of Communist Crimes in 2020, the sum of imprisoned Albanians during communism was estimated to be around 34,000, and this is for political reasons only. And 59,000 were deported and persecuted, either in labor camps, prison camps, and so on. The main institution that was in charge of verifying the ideological correctness of party members, but also ordinary citizens, was the State Security, or Sigurimi I Shtetit, and it monitored private phone conversations, correspondence, and purged the party government, military and intelligence agencies closely associated with Yugoslavia or Soviet Union and China after Albania broke off with each of these countries. So we are talking about a period when Albania went in full isolation. One of the elements and one of the events that showed how the government took control of the economy and revoked all civil liberties is also the year 1967, when the Communist Party banned all religious activities in the country and rendering all religions lawless. So even today, the exact number of the victims of communism is unknown. And these mysteries about the past and this lack of transparency, combined with lack of mutual approaches to deal with transitional justice, so from victims' perspectives as well as perpetrators' perspective, are part of what previous speakers rightfully pointed out: a lack of a consolidated democracy to the moment, and an instrumentalization to my research focus of the tools of transitional justice. To illustrate this, it's necessary to understand the phases of transitional justice in Albania, but to be more correctly, the phases of financial compensation and reparations of victims in transition Albania, because, as I said, the transitional justice process in Albania, even up to today, is never done as it should be, like including all aspects of this process. So the first one, of course, is the phase from 1991 until 1997. This is the period coinciding with governments ruled by Democratic Party, the first party established during the pluralist Albania. And the current Socialist Party is actually the reformed, it was reformed in that year, so from the previous People's Party at that time, who was taking the regime. During these years, many laws were actually approved in the parliament, and with that also the law of the right of financial compensations for former political persecuted people. During these years, these legal initiatives were the main ones taken with regard to financial compensation, and there were also some space where most of the victims could voice their needs, also being the fact that it's the period closest to the regime. The second phase actually includes both political and legal developments, starting from 1997, continuing up to 2005. This is how I have divided it in my paper. And I believe Italian friends, but also other colleagues are aware of the unfortunate events of 1997 in Albania, where a national turmoil and state collapse was caused by huge financial pyramid schemes. So this is an important phenomenon in Albanian society, and it's actually a wound, because political and social consequences of such event were profound, and they were long-lasting in the economy and lives of Albanians. during this sort of anarchy that we had for a couple of months, it is estimated that almost 2,000 people lost their lives due to this total chaos that the country was going on, and the government completely collapsed. So state institutions completely collapsed. And after elections of 29 June 1997, Socialist Party, which was the reformed People's Party, came into power with almost 53% of the votes. An important element here for the sake of transitional justice and why this period from 97 to 2005 comprises a specific phase in transitional justice is the fact that the former imprisoned communist elites were set free. So later on, the Constitutional Court decision declared these former communist elite members innocent and even ordered compensation for miscarriage of justice. However, it is important, and there is space for further research and further, especially communication with public and young people, because there is little public information about these trials in 97, and somehow it is perceived that the public has forgotten about this fact. Because during 95 and 96, in the first phase, so to say, harshest punishments were given for former communist elites, and in 97 they were set free, even allowed the right to compensation. And the third phase of compensation in Albania is from 2007 until 2013, where the process is resumed, and this coincides with especially financial compensations being revived in the country. Currently, and showing actually even the instrumentalization of the process and memory, is the fourth stage, the fourth phase, which has started since 2013 and still going on, with mainly financial compensations taking place into different installments. However, this is also coinciding with the current government led by Socialist Party of Albania, and on a separate note, instrumentalization of the memory and transitional justice in Albania can be observed also in the symbolics that the political parties have been used. While the Democratic Party is usually and has had this transitional justice and justice to former prosecuted members of the society, part of its program, it is observed during these years that the Socialist Party of Albania is trying to use symbols and symbolics to communicate with the public, a sort of disclosing itself with the past. So, for example, recently their members celebrated 30 years of foundation of Socialist Party, while the other part of the society, because in this regard Albania remains a divided society, claim that it's actually it should have been a celebration of its establishment since 45 instead of these 30 years of democracy, given that it has a history behind as a party. And even during the current elections, the Socialist Party has included within its symbol the year of establishment being 1991, which again speaks to especially young people as a sort of detachment from the past. So this is how through symbols and also actions, in my research, it is shown that the instrumentalization of transitional justice is just a power for gaining those part of electoral votes, and actually the transitional justice process has never been complete. It is, of course, important to point out that the parameters of justice are framed by the historical character of authoritarian legality, balance of power between parties, and concrete pacts reached during negotiations of transition. These are all elements that have been partially implemented in the Albanian society. And to conclude, my main takeaways are that, first of all, the transitional justice, even though partial in Albania, is a delayed one. And does it still make sense to continue with only one approach of victim centers, while unfortunately due to age and years passing by, some of the victims have also passed away? It's difficult to promote internal reconciliation of the Albanian society, which is much more needed, especially in view of other processes such as European integration or regional cooperation, because if our neighboring countries deal with reconciliation with a neighbor or related to collapse of Yugoslavia, in Albania we do face the issue still of internal reconciliation. So these are all parallel processes going on, but the young generation awaits for European integration processes. So how can we use transitional justice in favor of these ones? And another takeaway that I have, and to conclude, is by the expression of Hannah Arendt: the most radical revolutionary will become a conservative the day after the revolution. And this is actually to show and to point out the circulation of all the elites still going on in the Albanian political area without and this is because we lack that perpetrators-centered approach, and this is a sort of recycling former elites. And by claiming classically that we were all victims, it also imposes that we were all, as a society, perpetrators. And until we decide to go with a combined approach for transitional justice, tools that have been used will continue to be used for electoral purposes and only as instruments to powers instead of real transitional justice tools. Thank you. I hope I wasn't too long. I was trying to be short. However, I'm open also for questions with this regards. And now I would like to give the floor to Ray Shehu. He is a student at Mediterranean University of Albania, and he will talk about the influence of young socialist men on structuring political parties in post-communist period. Ray?
Thank you, Tatiana. Hello, everybody. My name is Ray, and I would like to talk about a topic that I think is very crucial to understand why the phenomenon of transition is so long in Albania. So, the influence of the socialist man on the democratization of parties and political pluralism. The democratization of a society is a complex process which is significantly linked in two important elements: technological development and human social emancipation. The approach of these two elements is essential to understand the degree of implementation of reforms, the implementation of rule of law, institutional democratization, and the process that the state is expected to have. It's important to understand class division and how this class division affects in the political system. In countries when technological development was high, well-educated professions where private property was inviolable and the middle class consolidated, communist movements did not take power. In other countries where these two elements were at low level, Communist Party prevailed. Albania, as a relatively young state, former part of the Ottoman Empire, a non-industrialized country with a high rate of uneducated, heated by two world wars, had deep political and social imbalances, resulting as an ideal place to install a dictatorial regime. The main questions asked today are two. Why is Albania so close to the West and still not part of the European Union? Why isn't the transition process taking so long? And to understand these two phenomena I think we need to explain the phenomenon of the young socialist man. And to explain the phenomenon of the young socialist man, we must go back in time. Firstly, we must understand the reason how this phenomenon was achieved in Albania. Among the communist forces operating in Albania, the first period during World War II, the Second World War, were two main groups, the Shkodra group, and despite supporting the cause of communism, these two groups had formation. The Shkodra group was formed in early 1930s, and included many young idealists and various craftsmen. It should be noted that Shkodra was one of the main cities of Albania with a high intellectual level, where many of the young people of the time had the opportunity to study abroad, and mainly in Italy, where the spirit of social movement was very high. The fact that there were craftsmen indicates a middle-class approach to the movement, as this was a political group with European communism ideas, which resembled the typology of modern social democracy. The opposite was in the Korça group, otherwise known as the Fire Group, located in a hot political area of the time, like the city of Korça, as the disputed territory and raided by the Greeks, and an area occupied by the French in the fragmentation of Albania during the First World War. This group had radical approaches toward other political forces and was totally influenced. Sorry?
It's okay, Ray, you can go on.
Okay. I was talking about the group of Korça. This group had radical approaches toward the other political forces and was totally influenced by the Bolshevik policy coming from the Soviet Union. Most of the individuals who joined this group came from the working class, despite the fact that there were also some intellectuals educated in Greece. Ultimately, should be mentioned that this political faction became the soul of the Albanian Communist Party, overlapping the Shkodra group. The radical methodology of the Korça group became the political platform of the Communist Party, giving the later features of Soviet Bolshevism and what justified the whole political way which socialist Albania would apply to the East and in complete enmity with the Western civilization. The Soviet model showed the model of cleaning the party from the faction which opposed the decision of the political bureau. Albania turned to totalitarianism. Most of the individuals who had been educated in the West were banished as the revisionist traitors and spies of Western agencies, and most of them ended up in prisons, in internment camps, and even towards executions. Albania opened a total war on religion. Priests and imams were imprisoned and executed. Shrines of worship were destroyed and religious property was confiscated by the state party. Albania recognizes the paradox as the only atheist country in the world. Religious beliefs were completely banned in the constitution of the People's Republic of Albania in 1976, when Article 37 of the Constitution stated, "The state does not recognize any religion and supports and develops atheistic propaganda to include people in the materialistic scientific worldview." Article 55 prohibits the establishment of any religion organization. In the period from 1944 till 1991, over 6,000 people were executed in Albania, with or without a court order, mostly being shooting or hanging, and their bodies were almost never returned to their families for a burial. Now, according to the study of Institute for the Study of Crimes and Consequences of Communism in Albania, there are more than 5,577 men, 450 women were sentenced to death or killed. All these people were part of what we consider the Albanian middle class, and the execution of the social elite would bring a vacuum in the society. This vacuum would be replaced by the creation of the new socialist man. But what is this man? The clearest definition of this concept of the young man is made by a Soviet author, Igor Kohn, whom we find in the magazine Way of the Party in 1954. The young man is a bearer of high political and moral values, the builder of communism, and in incomparability more worthy than any representative in the old world. He is a man whose personal interests are linked to the interests of people. He is ready to fight to the point of self-sacrifice for the cause of communism. He is a man whose attitude towards life is always creative. He cannot think of life without work. He is a humanist who has raised the flag of human dignity and is ready to sacrifice himself in the fight for the happiness of humanity. The dying bourgeoisie fears and hates it, its very existence, and the denial of the capitalist regime. The ideologies of the bourgeoisie are ready to slander him in any way. What does this mean? After completely destroying the class system and the private property through collectivization, the state party focused on the human transformation, create a new man who would be in the service of the party, an indoctrinated individual willing to sacrifice himself for the cause of communism, and Albanian communism was the state party. The party already had access to all spheres of life form, political, economical, social, and artistic control. Numerous were the cinematic films of the time where they idealized the formation of this new man, where in its core lay the sacrifice of teamwork, self-sacrifice, the conspiracy against Western system, and the glory of the party. Returning to the elements of democratization, the Liberal Party had control over both technological development and it already had dictated the human development. We are dealing with a period which begins in the late 60s and early 70s and continues till the 90s. Whole generation born and raised under the authority of the party. This transformation of Albania took place under the influence of the state party and according to the rules set by the party. In the end, the human became the tool of the party. When Albania was forced to make the great transformation in the early 90s, due to the dissolution of the Socialist Republic in East Germany and to the fragmentization of the Soviet Union and all Central and Eastern Europe, Albania would be the last piece of the domino to fall. This period found Albania economically ruined and without a democratic political culture. The Labour Party decided to carry out its transformation, but the only thing that was transformed was the name and the logo, as a considerable part of its members came from the ranks of the dictatorial regime. Despite being involved in the elections under the name of Socialist Party in 1992, only in 1995 the Socialist Party became involved in the organization of the Euro-Socialist Democratic Parties after making the statutory changes. Until 1995, the Socialist Party maintained Marxism-Leninism as a political ideology. There is another phenomenon that connect with the topic that we have mentioned even last day and even today, which is the decommunistization of Albania. Even today, after 30 years, the last minister of the dictatorial regime, Gramazruci, today is the first speaker of the Assembly of Albania. Whenever we talk about democracy, we mean the decision-making power of the member together with the guarantees of protecting the opinion of the minority, critical of the majority. Albanian political leader had been pragmatic in such situations by organization purges within the party. This phenomenon is noted in the organization of the Democratic Party of Albania, where even today, after 30 years of pluralism, the influence of the former leader of the party, Mr. Berisha, is still very considerable. A considerable part of the founders of this party left politics or held peripheral roles in the organization of the party. The lack of complaining party leads to the personalization of power, the amortization of governing mechanism accompanied by the impossibility of change and the deep distance between those who govern and those who are governed. In transitional Albania, the bazaar of political parties flourished, where numerous political forces were created with a local influence and owned by an individual. The case is the Social Democratic Party that for decades remained the property of one person and who was part of the dictatorial regime. And today, this party is bought by another person who United States has refused to give him the American visa. The cult of the individual, the legacy left by the dictatorial regime, is commonly seen in Albanian politics. It is worrying that today, in 2021, there is no longer an Albanian left to be represented in the parliament, but it's only the Socialist Party. And this party is identified only through its leader. Today it's impossible for anyone to come out against the will of the current prime minister. Features that bring Albania closer to the political model of Russia and Turkey. The more indifferent the population is, the higher are the chances of going to authoritarianism. The philosophy of this issue is that in a democratic state, parties play the mediating role between the citizen and the government and offer potential and alternatives to governance, seeking and aiming for the widest possible and inclusive coalition with the voting citizens. If parties are not seen and valued as democratic alternatives, if they have no support, there is a if they have no support and if there is a distrust in their international integrity, then it's impossible to achieve this expectation. The poverty in Albania right now that we are talking,
sorry to interrupt.
the World Bank.
Ray, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Please, I would like to wrap up.
What?
Can you please wrap up and have?
Yes,
only...
I'm at. This is my last sentence.
Sorry.
I was saying, according to the World Bank, it's 40% of the population, which is under $5 per day. The middle most taxed part of the population, the gap between poverty has increased, and history has shown that in the absence of the middle class, democracy is imperiled. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ray. A very thorough presentation going back from the former regime to its current implication and the main creation of this new socialist man and its implication in our current politics and this overall panorama. I hope that the papers and the research focuses presented here were of interest to our young participants, but also colleagues from other countries of the region and Europe. And we are eager to also in the following workshops to learn more also about your former regimes and the features of their regimes. Before going to youth perspective workshops, which is almost the last item in the agenda, we do have a stretching energizer because I think there was a lot of information to absorb, but we will have a couple of minutes to address the questions before going to the Energizer. So the first question was by Antoni Miska to Professor Ilir Kalemaj. From political and legal perspective, why Albania is still in transition nowadays? And we apologize to all for a slight delay in the agenda. So please, if the speakers can also keep the answers right on the point, that would be much appreciated. So Professor Ilir, the question is addressed to you. From political and legal perspective, why Albania is still in transition? Okay, maybe Professor Ilir has some technical issues. We can go on with other questions. We have many in the chat, and once the speaker comes back, we will address it. So now we have a long question. Oh, it's to all speakers. So a question for Altin. How much prominent is the anti-communism or communism narrative in the current electoral campaign in Albania, and what is its potential impact?
Yeah, thank you, Luciana. I think the question is put forward by Bleriana, yes. Thank you, Bleriana, as well. Very briefly, yes. Well, it is. It is quite present. The dichotomy that I talked earlier between communists and anti-communists. And you can note it recently as, for example, the successor of the Labour Party, the Socialist Party, nominated as a candidate for MP, a lady, an engineer, Mrs. Bozo, who in a TV show claimed that if we balance the outcome of the Enver Hoxha's dictatorship, I think that the balance would tilt towards positive outcomes, which elicited an outrage on the right-wing side and elicited a huge debate, which took place at least for 3-4 days. And I think that during an electoral campaign, it's not fair because it would, as I said before, it would deflect people's attentions from their real problems, and politicians who tend to use this kind of unpolitical narrative and to throw accusations against each other to deflect people's attentions from real problems and to not talk about policies, but to talk about things that are not of interest to the people, or to tend to degrade their political opponents. And the impact, I think, it's huge because it still keeps people disinterested from politics. If politicians, if candidates for MP, if candidates for primarship do not deliver policies, political manifestos, do not address people's needs and concerns, do not address social strata's needs and concerns, these kind of people, especially people that are not engaged politically, are not member of political parties, tend to stay away from political participation, which is key to the democratization of the country. And unfortunately, after 3 decades, this continues to happen because the past is not settled, as I said, because we have not dealt with the communist regime crimes, and we have not lustrated and cleansed the public administrations, political parties, and government offices from people that served under dictatorships or committed crimes or perpetrated human rights. And this keeps hunting Albanian society as a ghost till today. And I think this has really affected the ability of Albania to talk about policies, to hold free and fair elections, and address people's genuine concerns. Thank you.
Thank you, Altin. Another question from Bleriana is addressed to Arida. Based on the work you have done with young people so far, students and youth, how much aware are they about the impact of communism in industrial design and architecture?
Oh, I really thank Dorina about this question, because indeed this is my really my daily teaching challenge to raise the awareness of the importance of the digging the past of the design. So that's why on both universities where I'm teaching now more than 3 years, this challenge has been part of my curricula. And together with the students, we are, of course, I am teaching the departments in the design department, so I can completely talk about, or let's say, give some data about this kind of students designing. So together with them, we are searching on the topical thematics of the design, on the process, on the industry, on the material, on the different kind of products. And for sure, it is on different point of view, because some of them are to know the process, and some of them is to know better the material. So that's why as well the point of view or their analysis are in different kind of point of view. So that's why after this experience, I can say that after 3 years having this good experience with students, I can say that in the first year they were let's say interested about a period of having no idea. So we learn about the Baroque style, modern style. We learn about the Asian style. So now in their curricula is as well this part of the history that it was never before, and as well they, at least until now, they have not have part of the curricula to study about the product during this period in Albania, especially in Albania. So they found out that the process of discovering is so funny, so exciting, and I can say that they are now like the ambassador of, let's say, sharing and spreading this experience, how to prevent the past, how to prevent each product that you have at home, and how to love them. And this is that I'm really happy with the students that I'm working. Indeed, I see that the youth that I'm working, which are students, their increasement of awareness is very fast, and let's say more involvement, because they involve as well the parents, their friends, and they post this in the social media, and all the product that we finish. I mean, even the thesis that we do or the research that we do on this particular focus, they as well share with each other on the social media. So I feel that they didn't have any idea to prejudice, let's say, but now they are more than happy and to share this. What I found that the most let's say the problem of this discussion on this point is not to embrace the design or the communism style, if I can say like this, which I don't want to put everything in the communism style, but for more general term, is not the students, are the, let's say, my colleagues and people, let's say the second and third generation, that they have some idea, that they prejudice this design, and they found themselves to not have any idea about this, and they don't allow themselves to learn about that. So that's why this is, let's say, another target that we are going to push with students, and we will find out with the new curricula how to enlarge this impact, because I'm really happy with the work that students have done until now. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rida. And since Professor Kalema is back, I will combine two questions for him, one from Anton and the other one from Dorina. So from political and legal aspects, why is Albania still in transition nowadays? And how can we as a society move forward in terms of decommunistization? Sorry.
So I start with Dorina's question, although that was also part of the final remarks for the day, but I don't mind to answer them now. So I listen also to your presentation, Luciana, regarding the transition justice, because of course, when we refer to Communist Party and decommunistization, what comes first in mind is transitional justice measures. And of course, we all agree here that Albania hasn't done enough, and of course it's very, very late. But on the other hand, I think there is still room to address some of these retributive, reparative measures which Albania failed to do in the beginning of the transition. For example, Albania still hasn't passed a law of lustration, which is one of the few countries in Eastern Europe that hasn't done that yet. It has attempted a few times, but without any visible result. The only result, the few trials that it had initially, either were symbolic trials, such as the coffee trials, or there were significant trials like genocide trials, but everybody was amnestied a year or 2 years later in 1997. So nobody has really been punished on that matter. But it's not a matter of punishment anymore. It's a matter of justice. So what is important for Albania is at least not to allow political representation that has been formally connected to nomenclatura or have been accused of spying on other people and of actually making people suffer on the past regime, where some figures show that 50,000 people were either interned or jailed, imprisoned, killed, shot, sometimes often without a court decision. Second is the financial, of course, aspect, that all these people, relatives of the people that have suffered in Albanian prisons or in internment camps, should finally receive after 30 years. A lot of them have yet to receive part of their compensation. Another very important aspect that I also, when I wrote a recent text about frustration in Albania and about what should be done in the future, is about the youth, the young people in Albania that actually still read history in the old version. So if you read the history books in high schools or in gymnasiums or in elementary school, there is still a lot of terminology, as Ray mentioned, also of the new socialist man. That goes back to that era. So I think it should, the textbooks are very much representative of a political culture that has to be changed. The young people of Albania should not read the same story, the same narrative, even related to our neighbors, right? That sometimes it's used in a derogatory manner. These are small steps, but significant steps, and also civil society has to be included into that, into the process of framing a new law on illustration, but not only in transition justice measures in general. This is regarding Dariana's question, and of course, since that was part of my final remarks, I found the opportunity to answer that now. Regarding the other question, if I'm not mistaken, is by Anthony, by Christian, right? Costian, that the youth of Albania, so do you believe that the youth and the new generation of Albania will have the power to bring change? This is the question, right? After 30 years. So that's a very, very good question. And I fully believe that the youth have the capacity to change the current situation in Albania by getting more active into politics, actually, because we have a lot of political parties in Albania right now, as you well know, and I want to combine that to questions of Giovanni as well, because they point at the same direction, more or less. We have 140 political parties in Albania. We have 70 political parties that participate in every election, local or general election. So from quantitative point of view, we are a very democratic country. But when it comes to really the essence of democracy, to representation, of course, we are lagging behind. Now, what can young people do? Young people should participate. In the best case scenario, they should participate as actors to get voted, elected. They should run political campaigns. They should start. It doesn't matter if you start as a volunteer or if you start to run for an office. Daring is the most crucial part of the democratic process. But at least, the very least, they should vote. This is not an Albanian problem. I'm sure this is an Italian problem. This is a Greek problem. This is an American problem. Young people all over the world, statistics show, do not vote. They refrain from voting. They protest in social networks. They neglect to participate in political processes. While the older people in general, they vote. Now, in Albania, there has been a long problem because we have like 670,000 pensioners, so to speak. And this often is ruled by gerontocracy. They vote, and they vote, of course, on the left side of the spectrum, absolute majority of them. And of course, that's very convenient for the political party, Socialist Party, which, of course, has this large mass of voters that feels comfortable with, and they know that they will be mobilized, and they know that they will show up in the election day and they will vote for their favorite party. But if young people would participate in greater numbers, like they did in 1992, like they did in 2005. Of course, that's a sign of a change, and of course, things can change. It doesn't matter who is the election, but of course, in the right direction, because we cannot wait for change from 70 years old guys, not to discriminate against them, but change is always pushed forward by young people like yourselves. And that's why I'm very happy to speak to such audience today, because of course it's you give us full of hope that things will change anytime soon. 30 years is almost like an entire generation, so we are very late already. And the other questions of Giovanni, are the parties rooted in society? And of course, there are a lot of political parties in Albania, as I mentioned. Most of them, the absolute majority of them, are parties run by a single leader, charismatic leader, in the last 30 years. So you mention the name of the party and one single guy comes in mind. There is only one party that is led by a woman. All the other parties, now I think two, because also there is another party. But all the others are led by old men. If we would be in America, I would say old white men. This, it's not a very good positive news for democracy. Of course, we need more female participation. We need more minorities participation. We need more young people participation in politics in order to make change and in order to give rise to their voice and to be heard. Because politics is about participation. This is where it boils down. Democracy is about participation. If you don't participate, of course, the decisions for your interest will be taken by other people. It's very, very important. I was reading some studies before. Sorry if I took too long, for Italy or for Britain. And of course, young people were disappointed a lot because most of the decisions were taken by older people, generation. For example, in Britain, older generation, they are homeowners. So most of the decisions favored them, but were discriminatory against young people who would find the cost to buy their own home, their own house, very, very expensive. It would take 30 years for them to pay off the mortgage. And the same situation is in Italy, same situation is in Albania. So you see the parallelism. So the only way to change that is to participate with your own agendas, to group, to of course, according to ideological alignment, because not everybody is on the left or not everybody is on the right. But the most important thing is to participate. And I think the participation of the youth in Albania, and of course, I'm speaking here based on some studies that I also have done on the matter, it's lacking. And there is a lot of room to improve. Albania is still a very young country. We used to have the average age 32 years old, like 6-7 years ago. Now, unfortunately, it has increased, but it's still 37.5. So it's still under 38. It's still a young country. Young people make still the majority. But when it comes to voting, unfortunately, they make a minority. So by increasing their stake in political process, I think also democracy can be consolidated sooner rather than later. Thank you, Lieutenant.
Thank you, Ilir, for a very well noted call for action, which is necessary and very suitable for the Albanian context. Currently, we have the next parliamentary elections in 15 days. And also for answering and replying to all questions in the chat. Of course, other participants through the organizers can ask questions even via email if something is not addressed properly in this workshop. We are very grateful to our speakers for being open to always advocating for this important topic of Albania. The last two questions are addressed to Professor Dorina. And again, do you believe that judiciary system in Albania nowadays is fully independent from two other branches? It's the first question, and I think you somehow answered during your presentation, but you could focus more. And the other one is, what are the political ideas and positions that are represented in this pluralism? Thank you for the interesting dialogue. Dorina, the floor is yours, and then we proceed to the Energizer.
Thank you, Luciana. Very interesting questions. Beginning with the first one, judiciary in Albania is particularly the hot potato. So I want to answer the question, giving how it should be, not how it is now, because we, from the 2016, we are under, let's say, under construction in justice. I want to say that justice in Albania will be achieved when all citizens are assured that they will treat it fairly, equally by law, by a judicial system that should be independent, ethical and efficient. But the independence of the judiciary is very essential for democracy. It's very essential for the rule of law in Albania. So it's a duty of the new organs of the that has come out, that has been formed from the judicial reform in Albania, as I said, in 2016, with the constitutional amendments, we have a reform on the justice, on the judiciary system. So to increase the credibility and the professionalism of the judges, of the judiciary, of the justice bodies, of the judiciary system, is their duty. And in this almost 5 years of the reform in justice, they are committed to build a judiciary that operates in complete independence, without influence, and commitment to law, as the Constitution says. The judges should be committed only to the law. So the Article 179, if I don't go to the wrong article, says that the re-evaluation of the system is established in order to guarantee the functioning of the rule of law. So let's see if the new judiciary system that is coming out from the reform in justice should be real independent. As I say, is the most important part of the rule of law, because only with independent justice we can have the rule of law in Albania and the functional democracy. So for the next question was also a very interesting question. Here, thank you, because some part of the question was addressed by you, but I want to begin to say that Albania is a multi-party system from the post-communist system, as I said, pluralistic system, with a lot of parties, as it is said. The most important party are the Democratic Party of Albania and the Socialist Party, and a large number of minor parties. I want to say something. Albania is a party pluralism, but not a political pluralism. So it may seem strange, it may seem that makes no sense, but the fact is that the political coexistence is not used in the common action through diversity and progress. I want to say that the essence of the pluralism, that means equal through diversity, is not accepted in Albania for almost 30 years. But in the last 20 years almost, the ruling of the opposition parties and the position parties does not see themselves as complementary parties. They should cooperate to drive the national strategies, the development of the country. So a lot of parties, a lot of political parties, but it's highly polarized, and we should change. We should change the youth. You should change this climate of politics in Albania, as Ilir said, participating. Thank you.
Thank you, Dorina, and all participants and speakers for your patience. We've been sitting here and listening to very insightful discussion for 2 hours, and this Zoom meeting somehow can be tiring, and I think we all have some fatigue. So the most exciting, to my opinion, will be tomorrow's on-site visit, especially for young people, to the Museum House of Leaves. But now we will have a 5 minutes break of stretching, so you can just close your cameras, refill your coffee cups, do some stretching, and meanwhile, There is a funny Jamboard in Google that I have pasted in the chat. If you want, you can share also your thoughts and your feelings currently. See you in 5 minutes, which is in 12:13. All right, hope we are all back and that you enjoyed your break. I see on the chart that we have some people who are curious, someone still drawing an emoji, a nice this way, that way, or going back. It's actually a very puzzling topic and a very complex one. We have here Commipoly. You all know Monopoly, so this is Commipoly with no property to purchase. Someone who feels more, I hope, insightful, and another Japanese meme on communism. Okay, you can continue. Oh, it's a happy face. The drawing is finished, but you can continue to use this space to express your thoughts. And thank you, Altin, for joining the first part of the meeting, and he's open for more questions from your side. Now we are going to what's the most interactive part of the session, and we are really looking forward to your inputs. For the next 25 minutes, we will be discussing, and actually not discussing, but receiving your perspectives and reflections as young participants, your takeaways from all these discussions, and how either the organizer or UWB project can integrate and incorporate your young perspectives into further activities, always related to communist past. I will be keeping notes, and the wrap up of the session at the end will be done by Professor Kalemai. So the floor is open to anyone. Who wants to break the ice? So you can share anything so far. Or let's put it this way: is this your first time you deal with in-depth topics about communism? Is this the first time you listen to such perspective or critical approaches? What's your usual discussion, if you have any, about communism in your, I don't know, families or friendship circles?
Can I go first?
Yes, please.
Okay, so first I want to say hello to everyone and to professors, honorable professors, for their great lecturing. And for me, this is, I can say, my first experience to talk about those issues that are very, very important for us as a youth to understand basically what happened in the past and what can we do basically in the present for a better future. So actually, I was involved also in discussions, but not discussions in this kind of space. And for me, it's a great experience, and I really like to be this part of the workshop.
Thank you, Anton, for also being very active with your questions during the sessions. Anyone else, please? Just unmute yourselves and go.
Hi, can I go next? Okay, thank you all. It was a really interesting 2 days of discussion. In fact, this was not my first, let's say, training or conference on communism. In fact, before 2 months, I was part, let's say, of another meeting, which was organized in Austria, online group, about peaceful resistance on communism regimes, but also fascism regimes. And I also have studied, let's say, history. I have finished my studies in history, so I know, let's say, how bad the situation was in Albania and how people suffered during those years. I would also love that in the next couple of months and years, more training are organized, but mostly with high school, let's say, students, because I also have some experience with training myself with high school students, and there is like a huge gap maybe also due to the curricula, which is not in its best level. So organizing as much events with high school students will be really nice, because history is being forgotten by youth, and if youth forgot history, then it's a terrible situation for the future.
Great, thank you, Kostian. Anyone else? Come on, don't be shy. We will continue doing these workshops also with other partners and knowing more the context of other countries involved in this project. What about if any kind of input you might have, even for the way we treated the topics? Do you want to know some other information or something more of daily life at the time, like the case that Erida brought, that I personally found it very interesting? So any kind of idea that might suit your needs. And not only young people, also other participants, or especially other partners from other countries, if they are more curious now about Albania or more aware of our history.
Hi, I'm Natalia. I'm as well partner of the project from Macedonia. Thank you for the training. It was really interesting. It was interesting topic, and then how they were covered from maybe some kind of different perspective. From our side, it was interesting to see how the people from Albania see the perspective of the communism. We don't experience, let's say, didn't experience, I was a kitten then, young, very young then, but we don't experience that such a, let's say, terrible experiences. Okay, maybe there were some great restriction of the human rights, etc. But it's very interesting to see how those ideologies, let's say, were implemented in the other countries. And then thank you again for your insight. It is very useful when sharing and see the other perspectives and exchange of the experience. Thank you.
Thank you, Natalia. Anyone else who likes to share something? All right, we don't want to put you in a difficult position. This is just for us to take notes and to better tailor and improve our workshops and the product that the project will conduct in the future, but also to receive especially the very important youth perspective, because sometimes it's difficult to understand how a generation has a generation that has not experienced this regime perceives it. It's to young people something that they perceive as very long history ago, or something that impacts their daily lives. However, in the upcoming workshops, we will have opportunity to explore those more. We have now a different poll, and the final one. So please, if you can take a couple of minutes to reply to the poll, and then I will give the floor to Professor Kalemai for the final remarks, and to Dr. Tsurai for logistics of tomorrow's on-site visit at the museum. Let's take 1 minute to answer these questions, and then we go to wrap-up session. Okay, thank you all for taking time in filling this questionnaire. By the way, I forgot to mention, this final poll is anonymous, so don't worry about the feedback, and it will just be used to serve us improve our services and organization of such events in the future. So again, now the floor is to Professor Kalemai and Dr. Tsurai for final remarks and logistics. Thank you all.
Thank you once again, Luciana, for your kind moderation, and I really much enjoyed, and I hope the students are taking away their best impressions from this first activity organized in Tirana, and we learn more from each other, especially the Western Balkans, from past communist experiences and how they shape the democratic transitions in our countries. Special thanks also joining Erita, to SKIDEV and CCIS for organization of this 3-day event that will culminate tomorrow with a field study. I hope you all enjoyed, and I'm very happy to see young guys that like Ray, like Anthony, Daniele, and others, that Kostian, that were asking very interesting questions, were very active during this whole process, and that's very good news for democratic participation. Wrapping up some of the main issues that were discussed here, all of the participants were talking about different aspects of the communist past, mostly in Albania, starting with a theme that reflected on the collective memory and how that shaped political discourse in post-totalitarian societies such as Albania. We had a very interesting presentation by Erita that is also very empirical when it comes to the design of the furniture, our homes, and everything else, and how it continues to the present day. A very good example that comes in my mind is that of Komiteti, which is these bars spread around Albania, in Tirana, in Kocha, in Pirokasta, where they had all this furniture that it's a reminiscent of the communist past. And I think that's a very good way of also making young people aware by the surroundings of what the communist past was like in different aspects, where furniture was a critical part of our daily existence. And also what Dorina was presenting about the total, how totalitarian system basically annihilated the separation of powers. The separation of powers, and she rightly pointed out, it's the premises of what the democratic system should have in order to properly function. And that goes back, as she pointed out, to Montesquieu and to other illuminated thinkers, Jean-Jacques Rousseau or Voltaire, who were among the first to speak about the separation of powers. And actually, that's even not enough. Today, more and more, we talk about checks and balances, which is going beyond simple separation of powers. And of course, we can understand what Ray mentioned, that the young socialist man model was a model that unfortunately created, for example, I failed to mention the fact that Albania was the only atheist country in the world, proclaimed in 1967 constitutionally. So in constitution, Albania was proclaimed an atheist state, and we destroyed all the churches and mosques in the country, in a way destroying not just the national heritage and cultural heritage, but also our religious heritage, but also the new identity. The new identity, which on one hand, of course, the younger generation, younger is a term, but of course there are 50 or 60 years old, the ones that were born at the time and by now, that were raised in this whole non-religious environment. Of course, this has positive and negative sides. The positive by proxy side is the fact that that saved Albania not to be a battleground of different religious affiliations, like it has happened elsewhere, like in Lebanon or whatever. But on the other hand, also it has destroyed the foundational beliefs that keep society in a stable order. And of course, it cultivates political culture. And political culture is a very critical aspect if we want to democratize. But again, as I always tell my students very often, Albania is not an island, and neither is Serbia or Greece or any other country in the world. We are part of the same region. We share more than we think that we share with each other. And of course, it's environments such as this one that makes us aware of particularities as well as, more important, similarities that we have with each other and how to overcome that. When I talked about youth participation before, that's not just a problem of Albania or Western Balkans. That's a global phenomenon today. I was reading some time ago some studies in Italy, for example, about gerontocracy, the rule by the older people, and a lot of young Italians were forced, especially during the financial crisis, to flee in countries like Brazil, right, or to find opportunities. And of course, that happened with Greeks in Australia and Germany, and that happened with even other Western European countries. Of course, there is a greater demographic issues in countries like Albania, where, according to some studies, in the last at least 8 years, there were more than 360,000 people. Absolute majority of them young people, like 200,000 are like young generation, 18 to 30 years old, who are fleeing the countries, often with a one-way ticket, in order to find better economic perspectives, but also more security. Often they go for study and they never come back. So we have to stimulate them to stay in the country. We have to make brain gain policies. We have to make them active, engaged citizens in order for democracy to take roots and to finally consolidate in all its aspects. In political aspect, with more mature political class, as well as more representative. In economic aspect, with Albanian economy to become more competitive and to offer more chances for the younger generation to stay within the country and to prosper, as well as in establishing the rule of law, which is a very critical aspect for Albanians in Albania, but also for foreign investors, also for other people that come to visit Albania. So thank you very much once again for all the organization and events. I think opportunities such as this one should be made often so that we can exchange our views with each other. Thank you.
So the final announcement, it will be for the third day of the workshop. For the students that have already confirmed their participation, already has been sent the agenda into their emails, and we would like to as well to highlight here that the meeting point will be at the Opera Palace at 10 o'clock in the morning tomorrow. So nice to have you here, and thank you very much for everything. And Luciana, really thank you for the very attractive moderation and using all kind of sources that the digitalization can allow us, and you are doing this in a very perfect way. Thank you, Saidev and CCIS, for this project.
Thank you all. Thank you all our partners, Europe for Citizens, for supporting our idea of such a very interesting and necessary project on empowering young people with knowledge about the past and skills on how to deal with the past. Thank you to all our distinguished speakers that we had today, and especially thank you to all young participants for showing interest and being active citizens, and we encourage you to stay active and continue your engagement in the society. Thank you, and follow our pages, and see you in our upcoming events and workshops. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Have a good day.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Thank you.